Hello, everyone, and thank you all for tuning into our webinar today. Our speaker is David Lopez, Senior Director of Design and Customer Innovation at ServiceSource. If you have any questions during the presentation, please submit those in the box on the right-hand side of your screen. We will also be holding a few polls during the presentation, so we invite you to share your feedback when those come up as well. And now I'm going to turn it over to David.
Thank you. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Over the next 30 to 35 minutes, I'm going to talk about how organizations can navigate a business-to-business environment which is getting ever more complex, which is drawing from technologies not only from your own industry, but from related industry, and drawing from experiences that are not only business to business, but also business to consumer. And that can be a very complex environment, but hopefully some of the tricks and tips that we're going to talk about would help your organization steer through that storm and deliver the best experience or the right experience for your customers in a way that engages with them, not only as a single generic persona, but in a way that actually delivers better results for you as a business. What we expect in terms of our engagements has changed massively over the past few years, and it's changed alongside the way in which we have bought products and services. Before 1970 or so, we were a product-based economy. We bought things, tangible things, and then as time went on, we married those things with services, and those services were usually billed as a one-off charge or as an annual recurring charge in order to protect that investment that we had in the product. But over the 90s to about 2015, that ideal changed, and we pivoted towards more of a subscription economy, whereby the service itself may be delivered digitally, but we would buy an all-you-can-eat or a package that was defined exactly what we were going to get. We no longer needed to change our price based upon consumption, although sometimes that occurred. But crucially, we were well aware, and it was very transparent as to what we were going to pay for those services, for that product moving onwards. And indeed, those products may be delivered completely digitally, without the need for physical infrastructure, without the need for ongoing service and maintenance, other than those which was provided by the providers of the subscription itself. And finally, from about 2015 or so, the maturity that the subscription model brought was married with ever increasing, ever more refined, ever more elegant digital experiences, such that from about 2015, maybe slightly before, maybe slightly afterwards, everything that we're looking to provide to use needs to be provided in a way that best serves my needs. It needs to be provided in a way that delivers the right experience for me at the right time. It needs to be easy to use. It needs to be predictable. It needs to be conforming to best practices. It needs to be right. And this arc of going from product to services to subscription to economy, you can witness it time and time again, both in the consumer space, but also in the business space. So what have been some of the fundamental pieces that have occurred in business to business that have enabled that experience economy? Well, the first was ever greater technologies being born in the cloud. These are no longer technologies that used to be on-premise and just migrated into a shared data center. These are experiences that were born in the cloud and accessible anywhere. They're data-driven and personalized. They make use of best practice, but in addition, this is no longer a hunch-led experience. This is a data experience which is personalized based upon what you know about me and what you know about my organization. Thirdly, these technologies allow collaboration across multiple stakeholders. Now, we've seen this in business to consumer, whereby those stakeholders may or may not be employed. They might be a community which sit outside of the usual vendor employee piece. But in business to business, that collaboration means not only collaboration with me or with the OEM, but it might be in collaboration with partners, with users. Everyone pulling together, having access to similar information or the same information, and being able to draw out that insight that they need to be able to self-serve and collaborate on wider projects across the piece. And finally, and I think probably most importantly, the technologies are integrated throughout the customer journey. We're no longer buying a CRM system to take care of my sales data or a ERP system to take care of my resource planning. These pieces are now plumbed together seamlessly in a way that allows the right flow of information across the complete journey. And this experience economy has come about to address real challenges that the IT that the IT industry has had. Typically, if we looked back before the experience economy, back to subscription and products and services, businesses, when they had an IT challenge, when they had an application or a task that needed to happen, would define those tasks, would define those scope of applications in minutiae through an RFI and through to RFP, and then select their vendor accordingly. But those applications would be customized in order to marry into the business processes that were present within the organization. Now, by using cloud services and by using standardized integrations, we'll come on to integration in a moment, but by using the much greater experience that the vendors have in terms of industry best practice, now we purchase that best practice and configure to our needs as opposed to customizing to our needs. Second point around that is that historically, IT have been responsible for the integration. The business would specify 5 or 10 or 15 or 35 best-in-class applications, and IT will be left with the responsibility of plumbing these together, not only today, but tomorrow as well. Now, it's not only configuration of these products that's taken place, but cloud vendors typically take place, if you buy from a single vendor, will take care of these integrations, ensuring that data flows from one piece to the next. And finally, IT typically had to carefully manage and maintain the functionality and the upgrade cycle in order to make sure that the scope was right for the business, but also that nothing broke. These days, by subscribing to services, by accessing them through the cloud, these services are constantly updated. So, rather than previously, where we would ask for an application, best-in-class application, that would be 5 or 10 of those, and IT would be responsible for the integration, and they would have to spend bandwidth and money to make sure that all of those pieces are upgraded. Now, we make use of best practice that's been established through hundreds or thousands or tens of thousands of different deployments. The instance or the cloud that we're using is configured to our needs rather than customized to our needs, and we can do some customization, but it's within a sandbox or within the APIs that are defined. And then finally, those services are constantly updated and constantly refined to make sure that best practice and developments and technologies are always present and you are always at the forefront. So with that solution, is it possible that we could use a similar approach to solve a business challenge in the experience economy? So could we use that cloud approach, that always integrated, that always updated approach to solve a business challenge rather than an IT challenge? Well, what might that look like? Well, historically, we've seen sales and marketing responsible for new sales, and then other departments were responsible for different departments, but they would have to take data and pass it between themselves and share information between themselves as opposed to it being integrated. Now, with the use of cloud technologies and with the use of the integration between those technologies being much more simple, those two departments can work much tighter in unison as the data flows from a demand generation piece through to a closed sale. But it's not just affecting sales, operations typically were the ones that took these sales that were made and were responsible on delivering on sales promises. Now, because the information continues to flow not only between sales and marketing, but through to operations and through to legal and through to all the other departments without barriers, this is a much more seamless or reduced silos approach to the engagement. And finally, by potentially outsourcing or by using different providers to solve different business niche problems, organizations typically had a hodgepodge set of vendor management, each of which had different responsibilities and had different needs in order to operate correctly. Now, as businesses move towards ever greater subscription models, using those same industry best practices that we saw for IT, now we can actually look at and have a subscription model that ensures a competitive market today, but also ensures that best practice through other pieces, through other engagements rather, are embedded and made available to all. So we've seen from an IT perspective how cloud vendors, how cloud technologies, how by integrating together data, we've solved many of their issues. Now we can do a similar sort of piece for the business experience, ensuring that data flows between and insight flows between different departments, ensuring that best practice is always kept up to date in terms of the way in which the departments engage with customers, and ensuring that data flows between those different departments. So I guess I'd like to turn across to our first poll, which is for you as an organization. Which do you actually think is harder or hardest for your organization? Is it the first choice, technological transformation, actually the nuts and bolts of doing that form of transformation of embedding the latest digital technologies, embedding the latest approaches is the most difficult for you for your organization? Is that number one? Is it number two, that actually sales transformation in terms of the embedding of new techniques, the embedding of greater use of digital, of social, of digital marketing techniques, as well as digital engagement techniques, is that the thing which is hardest for you in terms of the way in which you engage with your customers? Or is it the third piece, a complete customer experience transformation? So how you engage, where you engage, when you engage, what information you engage with, what insight you get out of that data, and how ultimately you keep your customers happy throughout the whole of the life cycle. Is that the piece that you find most hard? So with that, I'd like you to use the poll icon on the right end of the screen, but please vote now.
So most people have said that customer experience transformation is the hardest piece, coming just in front of, or about 20% in front of, sales transformation. And I guess that makes the most amount of sense. When you look to change that experience across the complete life cycle of everything that you do, it touches on not only the technology, but sales, as well as the way in which those pieces are integrated. So that can be really challenging for an organization if you haven't got some of the basics that we spoke about earlier in terms of removing some of the silos, removing some of the roadblocks that can hinder organizations. If those aren't in place, that can be a real challenge.
Okay, so in the introduction, we spoke about some of the differences, or rather we spoke about how business to business was learning from some of the experiences that B2C organizations had. But I think it's probably worth just anchoring that back. Every business is made up of a collection of individual consumers. Our expectations are all set by the products and services that we use online, by the experiences that were provided online and through digital channels, as well as the experiences that we get in retail or in service or in any other sector. When we receive a great experience as a consumer, we kind of expect that same experience to flow through. So, I wouldn't buy something new today and expect it not to work with my existing ecostructure. I wouldn't expect to start a new engagement today and expect it not to work. In the same way that you wouldn't buy a TV today that didn't support Netflix or Amazon Prime or any one of the other common streaming services. And the reason that you expect that is because of exactly that standardization that we spoke of earlier on. These subscription models, these highly available, highly optimized, highly customer-centric approaches are standardized. I know what I'm going to get. They have well-defined integrations, and be that from an API or from a person-to-person perspective. So the integration and the way in which I use it is smooth. There's a commonality of the interface or a commonality of the language used, and I have very, very clear expectations as to what I'm going to get. All of those pieces blend together so that I know that when I buy a TV and it has the Netflix icon, I know the experience I'm going to get. When I buy a tablet and I know I can go to the store and get that same great experience. That standardization means that I know what I'm going to get, and I appreciate that I receive what I'm going to receive, and are happy to pay that subscription model. Now that's in a that is in a business to consumer space, but business to business relationships aren't one company to one consumer. They are multi-layered, both from a seniority perspective, from an exec sponsor of your customer, all the way through to maybe the end user of that, through to your distribution channels, as well as the people that provide service and support for your products. And it's this complexity of relationships, this matrix of relationships, which means that if I only think of one stakeholder at one time for each engagement, I'm going to ruin the relationship that I actually have with my customer. Because if I only think of one person at one time, everyone else, in the words of Janet Jackson, are going to be saying, "What have you done for me lately? What have you done lately for your exec sponsor of your 17th most important customer? What have you done lately for the procurement person of your 3rd most important customer? What have you done lately for the person delivering your renewals or delivering your services for your most valuable end users?" Each of those people have a point of view and have a relationship with you or with your distribution channel or with your partners. And each of those people expect you to be able to answer the question, "What have you done for me lately?" And in fact, when we look at business to business versus business to consumer, the complexity of the life cycle is much higher. You might consider as a consumer, as a B2C, I need to identify the customer's need. I need to make the sale. I maybe need to do some form of potentially of adopting, but I probably am just going to do that through the website. I maybe need to provide some reactive customer service when things go wrong, and that's probably about it. In a business to business world, I need to make sure I can find my customers that identify the need, move them through to make the sale, and then make sure that they are using my technologies in the right way and that they are being adopted throughout the entire organization. Yes, I also need to provide reactive customer service, but I probably also need to be proactive in terms of the engagement strategy I have to make sure that the adoption is taking place, to make sure that everyone is happy throughout that value cycle before I get onto how I might cross-sell and upsell, how I might understand the experience that's being offered through a customer success play, and ultimately then enable the renewal of that subscription or the renewal of that contract in some way. So that's many more stages that the best of B2B organizations go through compared to the best B2C. And each of those people, each of those stakeholders are going to have a different perspective of you and a different level of engagement with you through depending upon where they are in their relationship with you. So this is a snapshot in time of one particular product sale, and you can see that actually at this point, my exec stakeholder, the star in this piece, has already moved on from the project from the project that he was working on to the next project, and he or she is looking for the next thing that's gonna help the business in some way. Procurement, on the other hand, are looking at that technology which they've bought and how keeping the lights on and making sure that it's still supported, still active, still stable within the business, and that any obligations on the business are being fulfilled. Whereas your decision maker might be looking at how I can make greater use of that technology through expansion or through moving it across to perhaps to different geographies. My shared service owner is considering how I make sure that I make the best use possible of the technology that I already have. My user might be lagging somewhat behind if they're a new user and going through the onboarding stage and making sure they understand the technology. So different people will have a different level of engagement, and even within the same product sale, be at a different point inside that life cycle. Now, that's for a single product, or for a single segment, or for a single geography. The situation actually is much more complex than that, because every time you have a different product, or every time you have a different geography, for every single life cycle, for every single phase of sale that you're going through, you're going to have a different mix. Your exec sponsor, highly engaged in one on the new spot for a new deal, might be very disengaged on a BAU type of opportunity when the system has been in place for a long time. Procurement might be very highly engaged at the start and at the renewal cycle, but very unengaged throughout the rest of the piece. Your decision maker or your department level decision maker might be highly disengaged at the start of the project as it's being pushed from the exec sponsor downwards, might be very highly engaged as they see the value of that product through adoption. So this matrix of different expectations, this matrix of different levels of engagement is something that needs to be addressed if you're going to keep all of your customers happy or provide the right experience at the right time. And you can only do this by understanding where you are at each one of these pieces, each one of these slices, while understanding where you are for each product lifecycle or for each implementation phase, and then making the right level of engagement or flagging when the level of engagement isn't there. So with that, I'd like to turn on to actually the second poll that we have, which is, do you feel your organization engages with all the right stakeholders through the buy, use, and replace cycles of your products? So we've got three answers there. Yes, we absolutely understand when we're targeting an organization who the key stakeholders are throughout all of those phases, and we understand what their engagement level is and how to keep them engaged throughout all of those life cycles as we move from product to product to product to segment to segment to segment. Or no, actually. Candidly, we only have, or option two is no, we only have limited understanding as to who the different personas or the different segments are that we're interacting with. And we have very little information as to how well engaged they are or how likely they are to buy more of our products or to use our products or to replace as we reach an end of life. And the third option, which is, actually sometimes we're very engaged, and that might be dependent upon contract value or product line, or maybe we're different depending upon different geographies. So option three says, well, actually sometimes we're pretty engaged, but that kind of waxes and wanes depending upon who you speak to and where we are. So please vote using the poll icons on the right hand side of your screen. Yes, no, sometimes.
So the results are in, and about half of you said that sometimes you're engaging with the right people at the right time. About 30% of you said no. Actually, we don't engage with the right people at the right time, and I think that's probably a really accurate reflection. Certainly, the organisations that I've worked with were very good at identifying, or are very good at identifying, single stakeholders throughout the life cycle of a product or service. Where the challenge comes is making sure that you've identified all of those stakeholders and are providing their needs, what are providing against the gains that they hope to get through the use of your product or through that relationship, again and again and again as the product life cycle changes and across different geographies. So it's not surprising that you're doing it sometimes right, because you've been able to sell and probably sell very, very successfully. But it's that continuous engagement across the breadth of different stakeholders that can be a challenge.
Okay, so we've painted a picture that's described multiple stakeholders. Each are at a different point within that life cycle, and and that varying depending potentially on different geographies, on different product lines, on different services or products that you're selling. And that's clearly a multi-dimensional problem with pieces that are moving rapidly, or stakeholders that are moving rapidly, both in terms of engagement and also in terms of their view of the products and their view of the services. So how can I address this at scale to make sure that my engagement with my stakeholders, or the engagement with the people that are buying and using and maintaining and making the decisions around my product, are always correct? Well, we've got three ways that we think you need to do that. So the first, and it kind of echoes back to the ideas that we set up right at the start around how to deliver the experience economy. And the first is that you need to deliver a personalized experience for each stakeholder. And I guess I would use the word the most appropriate experience, because not everyone is equal, and the engagement strategy you need to have is going to vary depending upon the individual. So you want to make sure that for each of your primary audiences, that you're employing best practice that is always updated with the current best practice in terms of engagement, in terms of the way in which you contact them, the way in which you listen to them, and the way in which you take that feedback and refine it back into your products and services to make sure that they are always up to date. So you need to have an appropriate experience for each one of those stakeholders. And by appropriate, I mean it needs to be valuable for them as well as for you. And you need to have an understanding as to the cost of that experience that you're offering, and the benefit, the value that it's providing to them, and the value that it's going to provide back to you. The second one of these is that you need to track those interactions throughout the life cycle. It's no longer sufficient just to put some notes in a CRM system or have occasional net promoter score surveys that go out. Those interactions that you're having need to be tracked consistently throughout the life cycle, so that as an organization you can see where are we across these different stakeholders, across these different product lines, in order to design that right experience. And that means that for each of those stakeholders, I'm considering the pains that they're experiencing today. I'm considering the gains that they want to get out of using my products or services. I'm considering how best to deliver on those, back to my point earlier, in a way which is valuable for both parts of the organization. So I need to make sure that I have the right experience in the right way. And I need to be able to track that both through conversations or interactions that I have, but also I need to be able to track that through the data and through any implicit information which is coming my way. So if I can see that products aren't being used, I have an ability to engage with that person So you engage with the right stakeholder in the organization to understand why those products aren't being adopted, to understand where the gap is, and how we might best together address that. And then the final piece is around, back to that point I made earlier about integration. It is no longer sufficient to have siloed departments looking at their KPIs or looking at the way in which historically they've measured success without understanding the ramifications and how that works into your wider business. So data, insight, interactions, experiences, measurements and metrics need to be integrated back into your business in a way that makes sense for each of your stakeholders, as well as a way that makes sense for your customers. So by designing the right approach that you have for each one of your stakeholders, by using industry best practice, so by making sure that approach is valuable, that it serves to provide the gains that those stakeholders want, and removes as much pain as possible from them by listening both to the conversations, both to the information that they provide to you, and listening to and understanding the data that comes back to you, and refining the experience so that you do continue to address their needs. And by taking that data and insight, by taking that mechanism and providing it back into your business in a way which is integrated and not siloed, by doing those three things, you can address at scale those interactions that each one of the stakeholders need. And it's that method of having the right experience at the right time for the right stakeholder with their context, with their results integrated back into sales, back into marketing, back into operation. It's that seamless view of a business environment, or a seamless view of the interactions that you have with your customers that we call the customer journey experience. And that is what we do as an organization, through identifying and helping organizations land new customers through sales development and customer acquisition, through the adoption phase, where we can help with onboarding and adoption, making sure that the products and services that you sell and are understood, embedded, and then used with rigor and following best practice within an organization, through to inside sales and account management, so we can make sure that the right portfolio mix is present within the customer base, so that we can make sure that we're answering queries before they become critical, and we can expand that base to better, so that you can better serve your customers and expand the value that you're providing to them. Through to customer success, voice of the customer and health checks, so that we can understand what they're thinking and feeling, both through human-to-human contact as well as analysis of data as it comes in. And finally, through to the last piece, which is revenue retention, where we can make sure that those subscriptions and that services revenue and that time and materials or break fix or on-demand service, where those pieces are answered succinctly and provide the right experience for those customers from the very start, from identify through to the very end of renewal and the completion of that cycle back again. This is what we do as an organization. And with that, I'd like to thank you very much for your time and pivot over to see if anyone has any questions. Thank you.
Hi, David. We got a few questions during the webinar. So the first one is, in your opinion, what is the most difficult part of the customer journey experience?
So I think it's understanding the interplay between the stakeholders and where they are based upon what they consider as being valuable. So how engaged are they? What's been their feedback, implicit and explicit, and how that ripples through the relationship that you're having with that organization. And we had that slice diagram earlier on. Having the systems and the processes in place to understand that matrix, to understand where each of those stakeholders are, and to have the systems and processes and people that are able to flag that up and then correct those pieces, I think that is really critical as you manage very, very complex enterprise level relationships.
Thanks for that. And that actually leads us into another question we got. Managing hundreds or thousands of customer interactions all at once sounds pretty difficult. How would you recommend businesses go about solving for this?
So I'm not sure there's one size fits all for this. In fact, there isn't. It needs to start with the foundation of the data that you have and how that's surfaced throughout your organization. So what insight are you deriving at each part? How are your data and your systems flagging up anomalies or areas for concern? And then how are you presenting that data back to your people in order for them to actually deliver on that insight and have the conversations or the interactions in order to answer that? So it starts with data, and then it builds from data to insight, and then from insights to interactions, that be those digitally through whatever forms are most natural for your customers and for your stakeholders, or be that in terms of a conversation, be that digitally or voice.
Great, thank you. And then the last question, you've done a lot of work with companies trying to improve their customer journey experience. So you've seen it, on the front lines. What is one of the most common pitfalls you see that can be avoided when someone is trying to give their customers a better experience and transform those relationships?
So I think it's falling into that trap that I just described, to assume that one size does fit all. You're going to have relationships that you need to manage with white gloves, and relationships that you need to manage perhaps more digitally, or to give a different experience for. So for each of those stakeholders, what's the appropriate experience, and how is that going to scale and flex throughout the spectrum? And crucially, how are you going to identify accounts which have high potential for growth, and then maybe offer them an experience which promotes that or nurtures that? So certainly some of the pitfalls that I've seen is when organizations have tried to do everything digitally, or in a market environment that doesn't warrant it, or they've tried to go the other way and go very high touch for everything, and then just lose out in terms of the value that brings.
Awesome. We actually just had a couple more questions come in, if you have time, David. What are the most important data points to pull in initially to begin to conceptualize the customer journey?
That's a really great question. And I would say the most important data points is to seek to understand what value you are bringing to those different stakeholders, and measure against that. And that will be different from role to role, but also where it is in the life cycle. So try and marry your metrics to where the value is, and crucially, not necessarily where you see the value, but where the people that you're speaking to, the people that you're interacting with, see the value. If you can measure that through usage, or through adoption, or through the way in which they're engaged through digital channels, or through interactions, understand that value from their perspective and measure from there, and measure those data points, I think that's a really valid first step.
Great. And then the final question we got, at what level is it most effective to look at the customer journey? At the segment level, persona, account level, or individual level?
Oh, that's even better than the last one. I think you have to look at all of those in order to understand the space. And then you would drill down, you would segment across those as you're looking to solve particular problems. So we spoke about the appropriateness of the interaction that you might deliver at the segment level as you have a small, medium, large enterprises that you're selling to. You might look at it at the account level in terms of understanding where are the gatekeepers and what are the most valuable pieces of the interaction. And all of those roll up then to an individual experience that is then distilled into a persona. If you've got your data and your segmentation right, your persona should marry well against the individual stakeholders or a collective of those stakeholders that you're trying to design for.
All right, and I think that those are the last of the questions.
In which case, just like to thank everyone for their time today. I hope this was a useful session. You can learn more at ServiceSource.com with a little link there on the screen. But thank you very much for your time and have a great day.